Today I'm going to tell the story of a guy. He believed in love, but one day everything fell apart in an instant. It's a story about how easy it is to lose something that seemed eternal. Perhaps in it you'll recognize not only his pain, but also your own fears. Let's begin. I remember the day I picked up a guitar for the first time like it was yesterday. I had just turned 14, and my father had given me his old instrument for my birthday. "Maybe you'll find a better use for it than I did," he said then, patting me on the shoulder. The guitar was shabby, with scratches on the body and slightly distressed strings, but to me it was beautiful. I spent hours just looking at it before I dared to strum the first chord. The sound was clumsy and wrong, but in that moment I knew it was the beginning of something special. For the next weeks I spent all my free time locked in my room. My fingers ached from the constant playing, but I couldn't stop. Every new chord, every melody I learned brought me incredible pleasure. My parents were excited about my hobby at first, but soon their enthusiasm waned. "Jack, music is great, but you can't forget about your studies," my mom would say, peeking into my room late at night. I nodded, promised that I was about to finish, but as soon as she closed the door, I was plunged back into the world of music. School began to seem like an afterthought. I continued to do well enough not to worry my teachers and parents, but all my thoughts were on music. At recess, I often played tunes in my mind, tapping my fingers on the desk, which perplexed my classmates. By the end of my first year of guitar playing, I could already play several popular songs. This brought me some fame at school. At parties, people started asking me to play something, and I was happy to fulfill these requests. The feeling of people listening to your music, singing along and smiling was something incredible. But the real breakthrough happened when I was 16. I started writing my own songs. The first attempts were clumsy, simple melodies and naive lyrics about school love and misunderstanding of adults. But gradually I learned to express my feelings through music. It was like discovering a new language that allowed me to say what I couldn't put into words. In my senior year of high school, I already firmly knew that I wanted to connect my life with music. My parents, however, had a different opinion. "Music is a great hobby, son, but you need to think about the future," my father said during a serious conversation about choosing a college. "Look at reality. How many musicians actually succeed, and how many end up playing in cheap bars for pennies?" I tried to object, talking about my passion, about being willing to take the risk, but my parents were adamant. In the end, we came to a compromise. I would go to business administration school, but I would continue to play music in my spare time. College proved to be a challenge. Studying was not easy for me. Economics, statistics, management seemed dry and lifeless compared to the world of music. I often stayed up late, trying to understand the textbooks, while my guitar stood silently in the corner, as if reproaching me for betrayal. But I didn't give up. I devoted every spare minute to music. In the dormitory, I was known as the guy with the guitar. I often organized small concerts in the campus courtyard, gathering other students around me. This helped me stay connected to what I really loved. During my sophomore year, an event happened that changed my life. I met Emily. It happened at a marketing lecture. I was late as usual, and the only seat available was next to her. Emily lent me a pen, and I was struck by her smile. After class, we got to talking, and I learned that Emily was also interested in music. She didn't play herself, but she was a passionate music lover with excellent taste. We talked for hours, discussing our favorite artists and albums. From that day on, we started seeing each other more often. First, it was casual encounters on campus, then shared meals in the dining hall. I was afraid to make the first move for fear of rejection. Emily wasn't just beautiful. She was smart, ambitious, and seemed to know exactly what she wanted out of life. I often felt insecure around her, but music brought us closer together. I invited Emily to a small concert I organized with my friends in the student bar. I remember being nervous before the show, knowing she would be in the audience. But when I started playing, all the excitement went away. It was like I just melted into the music and forgot about everything around me. After the concert, Emily came up to me. "You play amazingly," she said, and to my surprise, kissed me. That moment will forever be etched in my memory. The taste of her lips, the smell of her perfume, the noise of the bar around us. From that evening on, our relationship began to grow rapidly. We spent all our free time together. Emily was not just my girlfriend. She became my best friend, my muse. She supported my passion for music, coming to all my performances, even the smallest ones. "You will definitely be a star," she often said. Her belief in me gave me strength and confidence. Thanks to Emily, I began to take my studies more seriously. She helped me with my assignments and explained difficult concepts. Gradually, I started to find interesting aspects in business administration. It turned out that many marketing and management principles can be applied to the music industry. 2 years flew by. Emily and I were happy, making plans for the future. I continued to write songs, and it seemed to me that they were getting better every day. Emily was my first listener and critic. Her advice was always accurate and helped me improve my writing. College graduation was approaching, and we started discussing what we were going to do next. Emily received a job offer from a large company in our city. It was a great opportunity for her to start her career. I, on the other hand, was faced with a difficult choice. On the one hand, my diploma opened the door to the world of business. I could find a stable job and start building a career. On the other hand, the dream of a musical career never left me. After much thought and conversations with Emily, I decided to take a risk and fully dedicate myself to music. "I believe in you," Emily said when I shared my decision with her. "We can do this together." We decided to move in together after graduating from college. It was an exciting and slightly scary move. Our first apartment together was small and not very comfortable, but we were happy. Emily started working at her company, and I got a job at a music store. Working at the store didn't bring in a lot of money, but it gave me the opportunity to be around music all day long. I could play different instruments, socialize with other musicians, and learn about what was new in the industry. In the evenings, I would perform in small bars and clubs, and in my spare time I would write songs. At first, Emily was fascinated by our bohemian life. She loved coming to the bars where I played, sitting at a table and watching how people reacted to my music. We would often stay up late into the night discussing my performances and future plans. But gradually, Emily's enthusiasm began to wane. Her career was on the upswing, and she was staying late and tired more and more often. "Maybe you should look for a more stable job," she once asked me after one of my shows at a half-empty bar. I guffawed, but those words got me thinking. As the months went by, our conversations about the future became increasingly tense. Emily wanted more: a better apartment, a chance to travel, to make long-term plans. I, on the other hand, was completely absorbed in my music and didn't notice Emily's mood changes. I kept believing that my big breakthrough was about to happen. I saw every performance, every new song as a step towards success. But the reality was harsh. Bar audiences remained small and my income was precarious. Emily came to my shows less and less often, explaining that she was tired after work. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that she was just tired and needed to rest. But deep down, I felt that something was changing in our relationship. We were arguing more and more about the smallest things. Emily got annoyed when I played guitar late into the night, disturbing her sleep before important meetings. I took offense when she showed no interest in my new songs. The gap between us was growing, and I didn't know how to bridge it. The turning point came on our second anniversary together. I planned a special performance at the bar where we had our first kiss. I wrote a new song especially for Emily, hoping it would help us get back that spark we used to have between us. But Emily called and said she was going to be late for work. "Sorry, we have an important project, I can't leave," she said. I was disappointed but decided not to cancel the gig. I played for a half-empty hall, feeling bitter that the person most important to me couldn't make it. When I got home, Emily was already asleep. The next morning, we barely spoke a word. She was in a hurry to get to work. I was upset and didn't want to start a difficult conversation. A week went by like that. It was like we were living our own lives, only occasionally crossing paths in the apartment. I felt like I was losing Emily, but I didn't know what to do. The thought of giving up music for a steady job terrified me. But I couldn't lose Emily either. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was a part of me, my inspiration, my support. I decided to make one more attempt to make things right. I arranged a gig at a good club, invited some music journalists. It was a chance to draw attention to my music, maybe get an offer to record an album. I was sure that if Emily saw that I could really succeed, things would work out. For a week, I had been preparing for this performance. I rehearsed for hours, practicing every note, every word. Emily noticed my enthusiasm, and I thought I saw a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Will you definitely come?" I asked. She nodded, smiling. "Of course I'll come," Emily said, and I heard a warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. The day of the performance arrived, and I felt more ready than ever. I spent the whole day tuning my guitar, repeating the lyrics, visualizing how I was going to perform. Emily texted me, confirming that she would come right after work. I was over the moon. The club was slowly filling up with people. I noticed a few of the journalists I had invited. They were sitting at a table near the stage. Time passed, but Emily was still gone. I kept glancing at the door, hoping to see her. Finally, it was time to go on stage. Emily still hadn't shown up, but I decided not to delay the show. "She'll probably be here soon," I thought as I started playing the first song. I was playing better than ever. I felt a connection with the audience. I could see how people were reacting to my music. Even the journalists seemed impressed. But every time I looked at the door, hoping to see Emily, I was disappointed. The show was coming to an end. I had played all the songs I had planned, but Emily still hadn't shown up. The audience applauded and asked for an encore, but a feeling of emptiness grew inside me. I played one more song, the one I had written for Emily for our anniversary. As I played it, I suddenly realized that our relationship wasn't what it used to be. After the performance, several people came up to me, including journalists. They praised my music and asked for contacts. At another time, I would have been thrilled with all this attention, but now I just wanted to go home and talk to Emily. When I got back to our apartment, it was late. Emily was sitting on the couch, staring at the screen of her phone. She looked up at me, and I saw a mixture of guilt and tiredness in her eyes. "Jack, I'm sorry, She started, but I interrupted her. "Why didn't you come? You promised." My voice shook with resentment and disappointment. Emily sighed. "We had an important meeting with a client. I couldn't leave. I tried to call you, but you didn't answer." I pulled out my phone and saw several missed calls and messages. In the heat of preparing for the presentation, I had forgotten to turn on the sound on my phone. "Jack, we need to talk," Emily said after a long pause. Her voice sounded serious, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat down next to her, not knowing what to expect. All of our happy times flashed through my mind, all the dreams we'd built together. Was it really all coming to an end? "I can't do this anymore," Emily began, and her voice trembled. "I love you, Jack. I really do. But I can't wait any longer for you to finally succeed. I need stability, certainty about the future." I tried to object, talking about how tonight's performance had gone great, how the journalists were interested in my music. But Emily just shook her head. "Jack, you've been saying that for 2 years now. Every time you're sure you're about to have a breakthrough. But nothing ever changes, and I'm tired of waiting." Her words hurt more than any physical blow. I could feel my world crumbling. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Emily took a deep breath. "I think we should break up," she said quietly. "We both deserve the opportunity to go our separate ways. You to follow your dream of music, and me to build the career and life I need." I sat there, stunned by her words. Part of me wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, to promise her that I would change. But the other part realized she was right. We really were going down different paths, and maybe it was time to admit it. "I love you, Emily," I said, feeling tears come to my eyes. "You've been my inspiration, my rock. I don't know if I can do this without you." Emily took my hand. "You're stronger than you think, Jack. Your talent is real. Maybe without me, you can devote yourself fully to your music and succeed." We talked all night, remembering our best moments, crying and laughing. By morning, the decision was made. Emily would move out in a week. That week was the hardest week of my life. We lived side by side, knowing that we would soon be separated forever. Every object in the apartment, every little thing reminded me of our life together and the dreams that were now crumbling. The day Emily left, I helped her pack her things. When the last box was loaded into her friend's car, We stood in the empty apartment not knowing what to say to each other. "Good luck to you, Jack," Emily said, giving me one last hug. "I believe you'll succeed." I watched her walk away, feeling like a part of me was leaving with her. When the door closed, I was alone in the apartment that had been our shared home just yesterday, but now seemed foreign and empty. I picked up my guitar and began to play. Music had always been my solace, and now it was the only thing I had left. I played and played until my fingers began to ache and my throat was dry from crying. The first few days after Emily left were a blur. I wandered around the empty apartment, unable to find my place. Every corner, everything screamed her absence. Her favorite mug, forgotten on the kitchen shelf, made me nauseous. The withered flower she had once given me for inspiration now seemed like a bitter reminder of unfulfilled dreams. I couldn't bring myself to put her things away. I sat on the couch for hours, going through the photos on my phone, remembering every moment of our life together. Here we are at the beach, happy and carefree. And here's at the amusement park where I overcame my fear of heights for her. Each memory was like a stab in the heart. The nights were the hardest. I lay sleepless, listening to the silence of the apartment, which not so long ago had been filled with the sounds of our life together. Emily's laughter, the sound of her footsteps, the rustle of her clothes, all of it now existed only in my memory. Sometimes I thought I could hear her voice, and I would jump out of bed, only to find it empty and silent. Friends tried to support me. They called, texted, offered to meet up, but I turned my phone off. The thought of going out into the world with Emily no longer around was unbearable. I sank into my grief like a dark abyss and didn't want anyone to pull me to the surface. The music that had always been my comfort was now hurting. Every song I'd written in the last few years had been about Emily in one way or another. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the guitar. It hurt too much. The instrument stood in the corner of the room, covered in dust, a mute witness to my grief. It was a week before I forced myself to leave the house. I had to go to work at the music store. I felt like a ghost wandering among the living. The bright daylight cut my eyes, which were used to the darkness of the apartment. The people on the streets seemed strangely carefree. How could they laugh, talk, live as if nothing had happened when my world had collapsed? At the store, coworkers tried to talk to me, but I answered one-wordedly, avoiding eye contact. Their sympathetic glances and careful questions only added to my pain. I didn't want their pity. I wanted everyone to leave me alone. That evening, I picked up the guitar for the first time in a long time. My fingers trembled as I touched the strings. I began to play, and suddenly realized I was playing the very song I had written for Emily for our anniversary, the song she'd never heard. A wave of emotion came over me. I played and cried, unable to stop. All my grief, all my pain and resentment poured into that music. When the last chord faded, I felt devastated, but strangely cleansed. Days were adding up to weeks. I existed on autopilot. Work, home, sleep. Food lost its taste. The world lost its colors. I lost weight. I became gaunt. I stopped looking after myself. Why, when the only person worth trying for was gone? Every day I fought the temptation to call Emily. I knew her number by heart. I could dial it with my eyes closed. Sometimes I'd go so far as to hold my finger over the call button, but I always stopped at the last moment. What would I say to her? What would she say back? What if someone else picked up the phone? The thought that Emily could be with someone else drove me crazy. I imagined her laughing with him hugging her, them making plans for the future together. Plans that no longer had room for me. These thoughts were like poison, poisoning my soul. One night, coming home from work, I saw Emily. She was walking across the street, holding hands with some man. They were laughing, looking at each other. I froze in place, unable to move. Emily didn't notice me. They walked past me and disappeared around the corner. That moment was the turning point. All my illusions that Emily would come back, that we could make things right, crumbled to dust. Reality hit me with such force that I could barely breathe. I made it home and collapsed on the hallway floor, choking back sobs. Pain and resentment overwhelmed me. How could she forget about us so quickly? About all the years we'd spent together? About our dreams, our plans, our promises? Did it mean nothing to her? I didn't sleep that night. Thoughts swirled around in my head, keeping me awake. I thought back to every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Maybe I was too involved in the music. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to her. Or maybe she just never really loved me. In the morning, I picked up my guitar and started writing. The words and melody flowed, reflecting all the pain and bitterness I felt. It was the most sincere and emotional song I had ever created. I spent the next few days honing this song. I played it over and over again, putting my pain into every note. It was a kind of therapy. I was venting my emotions through the music, and it helped me deal with the pain. But even music couldn't completely heal my soul. Every time I finished playing, reality hit me with a new force. Emily was gone. She had chosen someone else. Our love, which seemed eternal to me, turned out to be an illusion. I began to avoid places associated with memories of our life together. The cafe where we used to eat breakfast on weekends, the park where we liked to walk in the evenings, the movie theater where we watched our first movie together. The whole city seemed like one big reminder of lost happiness. I had nightmares at night. I saw Emily with another man, happy and laughing. I tried to shout to her, but she wouldn't hear me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, and it would take me a long time to come to my senses. During the day, I often caught myself checking her social media. Every new photo, every post was like a punch in the butt. I saw her getting on with her life, smiling, having fun with her friends, and I was stuck in the past, unable to move on. Sometimes I was filled with rage. I was angry at Emily for giving up on our love so easily, angry at myself for not being able to hold on to her, angry at the world for continuing to spin when my life had stopped. In those moments, I wrote angry, bitter songs. They were full of blame and resentment. I was venting all my frustration, all the pain of betrayal. But when my emotions subsided, I felt ashamed of those songs. I realized they didn't reflect the depth of my feelings for Emily. A month passed. I still felt broken, but I started to notice that the pain wasn't as sharp anymore. I could walk past my and Emily's favorite places without wanting to burst into tears. I could listen to our favorite songs without turning them off at the first chords. One day, while going through some old stuff, I found tickets to a concert Emily and I were going to go to. The concert was supposed to be in a week. I stared at those tickets for a long time, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to throw them away, to erase another reminder of unfulfilled plans, but another part of me realized it was time to move on. I decided to go to the concert. Alone. It was a strange feeling, sitting where we were supposed to be sitting with Emily, listening to the music we were supposed to be listening to together. But to my surprise, I was able to enjoy the concert. For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than pain and bitterness. After the concert, I went home and picked up my guitar. I started playing, and this time the music wasn't drenched in pain. Working on this song took a few days. I rewrote the lyrics, changed the melody, trying to find the right sound. It wasn't just a song, it was my promise to myself, a promise not to let pain and disappointment define my life. When the song was ready, I decided to perform it at my next bar gig. I was more nervous than I had ever been before. This song was different from anything I had played lately. It wasn't about pain and betrayal. It was about acceptance and moving forward. As I walked out onto the stage, I saw a full house. Apparently, the news of my breakup with Emily had spread, and people had come to see how I was doing. I took a deep breath and started playing. From the first chords, I felt something change. The people in the audience quieted down, listening to the words. I sang about the pain of loss, but also the strength it gives, about how hard it is to let go of the past, but how important it is to do so. When I finished, there was silence in the audience for a moment, and then there was applause, louder than ever before. People stood up, some cried. I felt that my music had touched something deep inside them. After the show, people came up to me, thanking me for the song, sharing their stories. I realized that my pain, my experience could help others, that my music could be more than just a way to deal with my own emotions. That night was a turning point. I couldn't say I had fully recovered from Emily's departure. The pain was still there, deep inside, but now I felt like I could use that pain to create something beautiful. Gradually, I began to notice that thinking about Emily no longer caused such a sharp pain. I could remember our happy moments with a slight sadness, but without bitterness. I began to realize that our separation, as painful as it was part of my journey. After a successful performance at the Bluebird, I felt a surge of energy and inspiration. Tom, a representative of a small recording studio, offered to record some of my songs. I agreed, but inwardly realized that I had some serious work to do on myself. Months of alcohol and cigarette abuse had taken their toll. My voice had become hoarse and weak, and my stamina was not enough even for short performances. I knew that if I wanted to take this chance, I had to change a lot of things. Tom gave me a month to prepare before I started recording. Those weeks became some of the hardest weeks of my life. I decided to quit drinking and smoking, which was much harder than I expected. My body demanded the usual stimulants. I was irritable and depressed, but I held on, realizing that this was my last chance to get back to music. Every day I practiced vocals, trying to regain my voice. It was painful, both physically and emotionally. The sore throat, the constant urge to smoke or drink made the process excruciating. But gradually I began to see improvements. My voice became clearer, my breathing deeper. When the day of the recording came, I was still nervous, but I felt more prepared. The studio turned out to be small and shabby, but with good equipment. "Ready?" Tom asked as I stood in front of the microphone. I took a deep breath and nodded. As soon as the music started, all doubts disappeared. I sang about our love with Emily, the pain of the breakup, the hard road to recovery. My voice was still a little hoarse, but there was a beauty in that hoarseness that gave the songs a special sincerity and depth. We recorded 5 songs in one day. When we finished, Tom looked impressed. "That was incredible," he said. "You have real talent, Jack. But you need to take care of your voice. Keep working on yourself." The following weeks passed in intense work. We tweaked arrangements, added instruments, mixed tracks. It was the first time I felt like a real musician, not just a guy with a guitar in a bar. At the same time, I continued to struggle with bad habits. There were days when the desire to drink or smoke became almost irresistible. At such times, I would pick up my guitar and play, reminding myself what I was doing all this for. When the mini-album was ready, Tom organized a small release party. People from the music industry were there, journalists. I felt out of place among all these strangers, but I tried to be confident. During the party, a young journalist approached me. She introduced herself as Sarah and said she had been to my performance at the Bluebird. "Your songs, they're so sincere," she said. "It's like you've experienced great love and great loss." I smiled. "I have," I replied. "But you know what? I'm grateful for that experience. It made me who I am now." We got to talking, and I told her about my journey, the breakup with Emily, the sinking into alcohol and cigarettes, the difficult return to music. Sarah listened with genuine interest. "You know, Jack, that could be a great story for an article," she said. "A story about how music can save a man. Would you mind if I wrote about you?" I hesitated. The thought of putting my personal life on display scared me. But then I thought, maybe my story would help someone else who was going through a difficult time right now. "Okay," I agreed. "But on one condition, you have to be honest. Don't embellish anything. Tell both the downs and the ups." Sarah agreed. We agreed to meet in a few days for a more in-depth interview. After the party, I came home feeling a strange mixture of tiredness and excitement. I picked up my guitar and started playing. A new song was born all by itself, about new beginnings, the power of music, that there is always hope, even in the darkest of times. The following weeks were filled with new developments. Sarah's article came out and brought attention to my mini-album. People wrote to me, telling me that my songs and my story had helped them through some tough times. It gave me the strength to keep working on myself and my music. Tom suggested I start working on a full-length album. I agreed, feeling ready for the challenge. We started choosing songs, discussing arrangements. I continued writing new material, feeling my voice getting stronger and my music getting deeper every day. One evening, after a long day in the studio, I was walking home and suddenly stopped outside the bar where Emily and I had first met. I stood looking at the sign, remembering that night. But for the first time in a long time, those memories didn't trigger a sharp pain. Instead, I felt gratitude for the time we'd spent together, for the lessons I'd learned from our history. I pulled out my phone and dialed Emily's number. I still had it in my contacts, even though I hadn't called her since we'd broken up. The phone rang, but I dropped the call before she could answer. I realized I didn't need to have this conversation. Our story was over, and I was ready to start a new chapter of my life. When I got home, I sat down at my desk and started writing. But this time, it wasn't a song. It was a letter. To Emily, to my past self, to anyone who has ever felt lost and broken. I wrote about forgiveness, about healing, about the power of music and how there is always hope, even in the darkest of times. As I finished the letter, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't going to send the letter. It was more for myself, a way to finally let go of the past and move forward. The next day in the studio, I felt refreshed. My voice sounded more confident than ever. Tom noticed the change and asked what had happened. "I've finally let go of the past," I replied, "and I'm ready to create new music." Work on a full-length album was in full swing. I spent hours in the studio every day, honing every note, every word. Tom was a demanding producer, but I was grateful for his persistence. He made me work my ass off to the fullest, not letting me settle for just a good result. My health gradually improved. Giving up alcohol and cigarettes wasn't easy, but I held on. My voice was getting stronger every day, and the clarity of thought I had gained was helping me write new songs. One day, during a break in recording, Tom asked me, "Jack, have you ever thought about going back to playing live? Not in bars, but in real concert venues?" I froze. The thought of performing in front of a large audience both terrified and excited me at the same time. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I answered honestly. Tom smiled. "Think about it. Your music deserves to be heard." The idea kept me on my toes. That evening I called Sarah, a journalist we had befriended after the interview. "Sarah, do you think people will come to my concert?" I asked, without saying hello. "Jack? What do you mean?" she wondered. I told her about my conversation with Tom. Sarah listened to me and said, "Jack, your music touches people. After that article, I got a lot of letters from readers who wanted to know more about you and your work. I'm sure they will come." Her words gave me confidence. The next day, I told Tom that I was ready to give it a try. Preparing for the concert went hand in hand with working on the album. It was exhausting, but I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. We chose a small hall with 500 seats for the first show. A week before the concert, I started to have doubts. What if no one showed up? What if I forget the words? What if my voice fails me? The night before the show, I couldn't sleep. I went out on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the lights of the city. Suddenly, I remembered Emily, how she always cheered me on before important performances. For a moment, I felt a sharp pang of longing, but then I realized I was grateful to her. Grateful for everything we'd been through together, for the lessons I'd learned from our history. That gratitude gave me strength. The day of the concert came quietly. I stood backstage, feeling my heart pounding. Tom came up to me and said, "Jack, look out into the audience." I cautiously peeked out from behind the curtain and froze. The auditorium was full. People were talking and laughing, eagerly awaiting the start of the concert. "They're here for you, Jack," Tom said. "Go out there and show them what you can do." I took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. For a moment, I was blinded by the spotlight. The auditorium fell silent. I picked up my guitar and began to play. The first chords were not easy. My fingers were shaking with excitement. But then I immersed myself in the music. I sang about love and loss, about falling and rebirth. Each song was part of my story, and I could feel the audience living it with me. When I finished the last song, there was silence for a moment, and then the hall exploded with applause. People stood up shouting, "Bravo!" I stood on the stage, stunned by this reaction. After the concert, people came up to me, thanking me for the music, sharing their stories. One woman said to me with tears in her eyes, "Your songs helped me through my divorce. Thank you." That evening changed everything. I realized that my music could not only help me deal with my own pain, but also support others through difficult times. The album came out a month after the concert. We called it Revival. The reviews were positive. Critics noted the depth of the lyrics and the emotionality of the performance. But the most important thing is that people listened. They found in my songs a reflection of their own stories. The success of the album led to a tour around the country. I performed in small clubs and large venues. Each concert was special, each audience unique. I learned to feel the energy of the room, to adjust to it. One day, while performing in New York, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Emily. Our eyes met, and for a moment the whole world disappeared. I continued to sing, but a storm of emotions raged inside me. After the concert, she came up to me. We stood in silence, not knowing what to say to each other. "You did amazing, Jack," she finally said. "I always knew you'd be a success." "Thank you, Emily," I replied. I'm glad you came." We talked some more. She told me how happy she was in her new life, that she was married. I was genuinely happy for her. To my surprise, I felt no pain or bitterness, only gratitude for the time we had spent together and the lessons I had learned from our history. When Emily left, I felt another chapter of my life closing. But instead of emptiness, I felt full and ready to move on. The tour continued. Cities changed, but every night I took the stage with the same excitement and enthusiasm as the first time. My music evolved. I started experimenting with new styles, collaborating with other musicians. As time went on, I released 2 more albums, each more successful than the last. My music was played on the radio, used in movies and TV series. I won several awards, performed at major festivals. But despite all this success, I never forgot where I came from. Every time I went on stage, I remembered the days of playing in small bars for drinks. I remembered how I struggled with alcoholism and depression. These memories helped me stay genuine in my music. At the peak of my career, I decided to take a break. I felt I needed time to recharge, to find new inspiration. I set out to travel the world without a definite route or goal. Just let fate lead me. During this journey, I met a lot of amazing people, heard their stories. I played on the streets of Paris and in small cafes in Tokyo, sitting around a campfire with Bedouins in the desert and singing with monks in Tibet. Each experience, each encounter left its mark on my soul and my music. I started writing new songs, not about myself, but about the people I met, the places I saw. When I returned home after a year of traveling, I felt renewed. I had material for a new album, an album that would be quite unlike anything I'd done before. I called Tom and told him I was ready to get back in the studio. He was thrilled with the new songs. "Jack, this is the best thing you've ever written," he said after listening to the demos. Working on the album took almost a year. I wanted each song to sound exactly the way I heard it in my head. We experimented with different instruments, invited musicians from all over the world. The response to the album was beyond expectations. Critics called it a masterpiece and a new word in music. Fans were delighted with the new sound. The album topped the charts in many countries. But the most important thing for me was not the critical acclaim or commercial success. The most important thing was the letters from the listeners. People wrote that the album helped them to see the beauty of the world, to feel connected to other cultures. After the album was released, I went on a world tour. I performed in the countries I visited during my journey, met people whose stories inspired me to write songs. At one of the shows in London, Sarah, the journalist who wrote the first article about me many years ago, came backstage to see me. We hadn't seen each other for a few years, but we kept in touch. "Jack, I'm proud of you," she said. "You've come such a long way. Remember how you were when we first met?" I smiled. "How could I forget? You were one of the first people to believe in me." We talked for a long time that night. We remembered the past, discussed the present, dreamed of the future, and suddenly I realized I was in love. In love with this smart, kind woman who had been by my side since the beginning of my journey. We were both busy with our careers, but made time for each other. Sarah traveled with me on tour, writing articles about the places we visited. 2 years into our relationship, I proposed to Sarah. It happened in the very bar where I had once performed in front of an empty auditorium long ago. Now that bar has become a popular place among musicians. thanks in large part to my story. We got married among close friends and family. At the wedding, I performed a new song I wrote especially for Sarah.